You're watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.
Hello and welcome to the 10, presented by Bet Rivers, a weekly Big Ten basketball podcast, part of the Bet Rivers Network. We've made it to the second weekend. It's a great time for college basketball fans. The euphoria of the first weekend has worn thin, but for a lot of Big Ten programs, there are still championships to compete for, and there are bets to be made. I'm Greg Waddell. I'm joined by Doug Kezirian and Troy Machir. Gentlemen, I'd like to go around the horn real quick. Doug, we'll start with you. Give me your biggest takeaway for the Big Ten Conference at the end of two rounds.
I wouldn't call them pretenders because they escaped the first round and survived and really took care of business. But in the favorite role, I would say the teams that we thought could be standing here in the Sweet 16 have emerged, which is no shocker because the entire tournament has been mostly chalk and mostly predictable. Yes, we got the buzzer beater with Maryland, and we had some other nail biters, and we do have a couple small upsets. But as we all know, only four conferences comprising of the Sweet 16, and four of which are from the Big Ten, and it makes sense. This is what we should want as a basketball fan. Sure, it's nice to have a Cinderella, but the teams we thought that were up to snuff, so to speak, are here. And I've been fairly critical of Illinois and teams like that they just looked a little off. Them, maybe Wisconsin at times, even Oregon had the upside and could have pulled off. But for the most part, these are the teams we expected. If you were told pick four teams that you think are going to be standing in the Sweet 16, these are the ones I would have picked.
I agree. These four certainly spent, I think, the most stretches of the season being the answers of who's the top four in this league. There was the big stretch from December to January where Purdue looked great and went on a huge win streak. Michigan was in first place for much of the back half of this league, and everybody had their ups and downs except for Michigan State. But certainly these four, I feel like, had the longer extended stretches of success. And ultimately in the first weekend, they played true to that upside the same way that maybe a team like Illinois, maybe a team like UCLA played true to their floor that they showed consistently at times this year. Troy, any major takeaways from you? Any major surprises for you for this conference from the first weekend?
Not necessarily a surprise, but, after, the first round, they were 8-0 covering the spread in all 8 games. And if you touted that or you were lauding them for that, the typical response was, well, they've played very weak teams, no single seeded teams. So, it was potentially really going to come back to bite them in the second round. And, obviously we did see Wisconsin and Illinois, UCLA, Oregon, but those are the teams like we discussed that had more flaws or couldn't put it together. So the fact that, these teams could eke out games, cover in some spots like Michigan State, finally get over the hump Maryland and hit a buzzer beater themselves instead of losing via one, I think it proved that this is, in fact, probably the second best conference in the country. And, while this is called the 10, today we could be calling it the 16 because a lot of SEC teams are going up against Big Ten teams in the Sweet 16. So we'll have a really good gauge. If you like to play the game, what is the best conference in the country? The Sweet 16 is going to determine it because a lot of teams in the Big Ten are playing the SEC, and we'll only get one team from each game from each conference.
A battle for supremacy ensues this upcoming weekend. It should be fun. All right, we've got 4 Sweet 16 games from Big Ten teams that we will preview and handicap and give you our best bets for. Let's start with the Maryland Terrapins, the 4 seed, taking on the number 1 seeded Florida Gators. Maryland an underdog. That should not be a surprise. Plus 245 on the money line. Florida 6.5 point favorites, minus 335 if you're looking to throw the Gators in a bigger parlay. And our total here is 154.5. Doug, at first glance, what do you got here?
So one thing I love to do in the tournament, more so when it goes from Thursday, Friday to the weekend, is regression. So if a team didn't look great, kind of bet on them in the next game. Really, I'm much more of a believer in situational handicapping. I just think the numbers are so tight, and let's face it, some guys are going to make shots, some guys are going to miss. It's kind of hard, but I think the situational handicapping for me is my preference and what it comes down to. So the question, I guess, here is, did Hurley show the world the best way to beat Florida, or did Florida get its wake-up call and they're going to flex their muscles? They certainly got it down the stretch and hit some big shots and made the plays. I think Maryland has sort of the blueprint, the internal like framework to pull off this upset, actually, let alone cover. But I just think the Gators are so powerful and potent. I do think the free throw shooting concerns me a little bit with a number at this size. But man, I just think I'm going to need more than 6.5. I feel like I'm almost, sometimes this happens to all of us as bettors, is you're chasing a wager you wish you made the previous game. So I feel like there's a part of people who are going to want the dog here that really are regretting not taking UConn in the points and trying to get it back in this game. There's a little bit of FOMO component to this. So for me, it's Florida or pass. I do think Maryland's going to be capable of it, but I think too many things have to go right for them to pull it off or even cover. So I like the Gators a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot bet, as you mentioned, because I could see the argument for both sides, as you just alluded to. Maybe you feel you missed the UConn side, so okay, here we go. Let's take Maryland. You could argue, ooh, I missed the Colorado State side. Let's take Florida here, because I didn't love what I saw from Maryland in that game. I thought Maryland would decisively sort of handle business against the Mountain West 5 seed. And it didn't happen. Now, Nick Clifford's very good. Nico Medved's going to be a force in the Big Ten for long years to come. But, the Derek Queen shot was sensational. I just did not see the best version of Maryland in that game. Now, 5 days here to get their legs underneath them. We know that Maryland's not a very deep team. So as far as these little, 3-day gaps go, or a 1-day turnaround, 1 day of prep, I like getting Maryland on the first day and not the potential Elite Eight game where they might be running short on fumes again. So I'm actually going to take a little bit of an unorthodox play here. I'm going to take Maryland first half, because I do think Florida is good enough to wear this team down, and I expect Florida to win the game. I don't feel strongly one way or the other on the 6.5 side here, but I do think that Maryland is a team schematically that Florida could be frustrated by. Florida's bigs, I thought, really struggled against UConn's bigs. Samson Johnson had a double-double. Terrace Reed got in foul trouble, but even he was dominant on the boards at moments in that game. Derek Queen's a guy that's had 20 rebounds in a game this year. Julian Reese is a double-double threat every time he steps on the floor. The physicality of those guys, I think, can hold up well against Florida's front court. They're going to need to in order to have a chance to seriously compete in this game for 40 minutes. And ultimately, like I said, Florida's depth, they've got 3 guys off the bench that are just so good. I expect them to wear them down. Maybe do a little Michigan State, close first half, win the game by 10 in the second half. But I'll take Maryland to cover the first half number in this game as my one play that I'm after. Troy, do you have any insights you can add for us?
Yeah, well, I have an interesting one right on what you were discussing, and that's Maryland has lost the first half in 14 straight games against AP top 5 teams. Now, this does go back to a previous regime with Mark Turgeon. It struggled mightily against ranked opponents, especially on the road. Playing in the Big Ten, you do have opportunities to play top 5 teams, especially last year with Purdue, and Michigan State has been in and around there. What's really interesting to me, and certainly we do have some time until tip-off. So the betting numbers that we've seen come in at Bet Rivers still, are not 100% accurate, because the market still has to kind of adjust and set itself. 93% of the money and 91% of the tickets are on the Gators here to win. 91% of the money and 78% of the tickets are on Florida to cover. And then 84% of the money and 85% of the tickets are on the over. Those are all really strong numbers, and potentially that's coming off the backs of thinking Maryland escaped while Florida held strong, even though they both were in tight games that could have gone the other way. We could sit here talking about, mentioning Colorado State and not having to talk about Maryland and potentially playing UConn. So it is interesting to me that these numbers are so strong so early. They will come down. I could see this, I think it will still be decisively in the public favor of Florida, but they were not super impressive against UConn. Now, certainly UConn is the defending back-to-back national champions, not the same roster, but they have some gusto in March. And I think Florida, maybe was caught off guard. They struggled in the first half. So I'm super fascinated by this game. I think that the size that Maryland has will be able to work against Florida. I wonder how long the legs hold up, to your point. 6.5 to me is not a great number. And it's interesting because, Florida has covered They're 7-1 against the spread as a favorite of 7 or less points. Maryland is 5-2 against the spread as an underdog. One of those has to give, so there's a lot of interesting trends here. The over has hit in each of Florida's last 9 games. The under has hit in 7 of Maryland's last 8 games. I tend to believe at 154.5 that this is going to be an under game. I think it could be a slow start to the game. You just see possessions go way down in March. I think you could, the game will slow down a lot. And the free throw shooting has been an issue. I like to play unders, and especially if it's a relatively high number like 154.5. This is one where I think it's going to be on the lower side of that. But, I'm surprised that it's only 6.5 because I thought there would be a little bit more adjustment to the fact that Maryland escaped by the thinnest of margins, the extra of steps, if you will, to the point where Maryland fans at halftime, and I'm recording this about 15 minutes from College Park, Maryland. Maryland fans at halftime were ready to sell Kevin Willard, give him to Villanova. Maryland fans always want the next big head coach. They're never satisfied. And they were done with Kevin Willard in the first half because their team came out sluggish. Colorado State was all over the glass. The effort, the hustle was there. They were getting out rebound, at halftime, like 13 offensive rebounds to 7. So this is a really tricky spot for Maryland fans. I think they can win, but I would certainly have to lean on the side of the Gators to win.
It is 2 teams that are in pretty impeccable form. Going back to February 1st, going back to March 1st, really the last 3 weeks. Florida's the best team in the country, 8-0. Obviously, they won the SEC tournament. They're playing like the best 1 seed in this tournament. Maryland, no slouch, 6th nationally since March 1st. And the team they just eked by, Colorado State, I know I was downplaying a little bit, actually the 5th best team in the country since March 1st per Bart Torvik. So expect some high-level play. No surprise that something's got to give, and the trends might favor both of these teams. Let's move to the second game this weekend. We've got Michigan State minus 3.5 against Ole Miss. Ole Miss plus 135 on the money line at Bet Rivers. Michigan State minus 175 to win outright. Our total is 143.5. Tom Izzo, Chris Beard. The last time these two met in the NCAA tournament in the Final Four back in 2019, Chris Beard and his Texas Tech Red Raiders got the best of Tom Izzo's Spartans. Doug, what do you think is going to happen this time?
Yeah, I'm really excited for the coaching matchup. Also, the fact that there's several days between now and between when they last played, so it's going to be a good sort of scouting. I'm on the first half under. I don't, look. You referenced it the previous game, Greg, just like what Sparty is doing in the first half. Like, I just don't want to bet into that. I mean, there's just no reason. So the question is, why would I not take Ole Miss on the first half? Because there is a chance that Sparty plays well to start. And there's also a chance that Ole Miss doesn't play all that great. And I don't think the offense is that impressive. Now, the metrics would say otherwise. They rank top 25 in both offensive and defensive rating. I'm surprised Sparty is 25th in offensive rating. I feel like this is a team that could go cold really easily, but that's splitting hairs, of course. That's when we're talking through the lens of a national championship. I just think it's too many points. Here, I'm checking out Bet Rivers. We're looking at 68.5. It's a little juice to the under, but yeah, man, I just think this is a lot of points for teams that are going to have scouted each other quite well. And we've seen some crazy points in the final minute of some of these tournament games, like 20 points in the final minute. In some of these, the Clemson game last week comes to mind. But we've also seen 1-point games where they just alternate and they don't get fouled. So you run the risk. But knowing that Michigan State's been such a strong second half team, and it's sort of the blueprint of what Izzo does, and their depth sort of gets you in the second half as well. That's why I like the first half under 68.5.
I think that's a good play as well. I think first half unders with Michigan State, I'll just bet them right now. You don't have to even convince me. Like, it feels like a constant thing. It's a very similar team to St. John's too, which should scare you a little bit at this point in the season, as St. John's showed. When you're so cold from three or so capable of just missing all of your jump shots, it's very vulnerable. You're susceptible to losing at any given point. And Michigan State has flirted with disaster in their first couple games in this tournament. That's not exactly something that would make any Spartan fan or any Spartan backer comfortable here. But I'm going to flip the script, and I'm going to tell you why I love Michigan State minus 3.5 as one of my favorite plays this weekend. This Ole Miss team is old. They're experienced. They're very well coached. That's for sure. But they have a couple things schematically that they are very poor at on a national scale that I think play right into Michigan State's hands. Number one, they're not a very good rebounding team. This is not a team that crashes the glass at all trying to generate second chances. Much more importantly for this matchup, they are 222nd nationally in defensive rebounding rate. Michigan State will just make you pay. If you aren't in the top 200 on the boards, good luck against the way these Michigan State athletes and even Jackson Kohler just flies around and outworks you for 40 minutes. And then maybe most importantly with what has happened to Michigan State's offense in this tournament, especially in second halves, they rely on getting to the free throw line where they make all of their free throws. Michigan State is 26th in the country in free throw percentage. They shoot 78% from the line. They're 44th in free throw attempt rate. Ole Miss fouls a ton. They are 317th in defensive free throw attempt rate allowed. It's just a team that plays physically and doesn't mind getting in foul trouble. Jeremy Fears, Frankie Fiddler, the rest of the Michigan State offense is very, very good at drawing contact and getting their easy points at the line. I think they're going to feast at the free throw line in this game. And while I do anticipate a very exciting coaching matchup, Chris Beard's a guy that I just love to back in the NCAA tournament. He's made runs plenty of times before. I think this is Tom Izzo with a little revenge on his mind. And a Tom Izzo team, by the way, that has gotten horrible play from their star in this tournament and covered the spread twice. At some point, Jace Richardson's got to play well. And I don't know what was up with him in that game against New Mexico, but if they just get him back to form, I think a little shooting regression for Ole Miss as well. They shot 56% from three against Iowa State, 40% from three in game one. I think all signs point to a Michigan State cover here for me. Troy, what can you add for us from a trends perspective?
Yeah, well, to Doug's point about the first half under, Ole Miss has lost the first half in 8 straight games against AP top 10 teams, kind of similar to what we just discussed in Maryland. And, that lends itself to Michigan, or there not being a lot of points scored in the first half, because if Michigan plays well, that's not necessarily them hitting a lot of three-pointers, getting to the basket a lot. It means they're limiting their opponent getting to the basket, turning back shots. So they're playing well. It's the good defense leads to the best offense, and I think that lends itself to first half under. I myself will be on the game under. I don't know how anyone cannot be on an under in a Michigan State game at this point. They're the second best team in the country this year at hitting unders. They've hit the under in both of their previous games. This will be a slower game. I think tournament games, as you get closer and closer to the national championship game, get tighter. The games take longer. There's more stoppages. That means it's harder to get back in rhythm after the long TV timeouts. The one interesting thing about Ole Miss here, they are 10-6 as an underdog this year. This is a Sweet 16 team we're talking about entering 16 of their 35 games this year as an underdog. Now, certainly that has a lot to do with being the 6th or 7th best team in the SEC, and they're covering more often than not. But, they're 18-16-1 against the spread across the board. 10 of those 18 wins have come as underdogs. So this team is very erratic. When they're favored, they may not play up to snuff, and when they're underdogs, they're going to keep things close. I would stay away from the spread here, personal opinion, because I do think this is going to be a relatively close game, although I think Sparty has the edge in talent and defense, and as you mentioned, on the boards. What we're seeing thus far is similar to the Florida-Maryland game, and I think we're going to see this throughout, is that it's a very chalk tournament. People have recognized that. Even if it wasn't a chalk tournament, bettors favor favorites. Right now, 90% of the money and 83% of the tickets at Bet Rivers is on Michigan State to win. 79% of the money, 76% of the tickets is on Michigan State to cover. And here's the interesting one. 84% of the money and 76% of the money is on the over. If this were 133.5, I would be fine taking the over. This is 143.5. Michigan State, yes, this is a regression from their unders of 152.5 in the first round, 148.5 in the second round. Is now 5-point drop to 143.5. But as I mentioned, the game slows down. I am decidedly on the under in this game with a no play. But I think this is going to be a very close game. And one last thing, will we see an overtime in this tournament? I think it comes in the Sweet 16. I don't know if we've ever had a tournament in my lifetime that has had no overtimes in the first and second rounds. But as we saw in conference tournaments, as the better teams got playing each other, it seems like every game was decided by 6 points or less. I think now that we've gotten, the mid majors, the low majors out, and the quality of these games are just off the charts, I think you could see overtimes come into play, which would be, you can get really good value on a tie at the end of regulation right before tip off. Somewhere it depends on the matchup, but could be 4-1 all the way up to 10-1.
Betting overtimes, betting buzzer beaters, one of my favorite pastimes in the NCAA tournament. So I don't hate that shout whatsoever, Troy. And a game that we expect to be close. I think that's a good poll. Okay, moving on to our third game here. The luckiest team in college basketball didn't need luck to win their round of 32 game. Breaking news, Michigan Wolverines earned a victory that nobody's all that upset about, and their reward for that is the number 1 overall seed in this tournament. The Auburn Tigers await with National Player of the Year candidate Johni Broome. Michigan is 3-1 on the money line as an underdog here at Bet Rivers. Auburn -8 is the spread, and then our total at 152.5. Doug, what are your thoughts?
I think this is the game where Auburn could go down. They've played with fire a little bit. Creighton wasn't the right matchup for them. I worry that the Tigers have the right sort of formula for Michigan's size, but as long as Michigan can do some things offensively, I think they can hang around and cover this game. And I do think there's a recipe and a path there for the upset. We know Dusty May certainly can push the right buttons this time of year. And let's face it, he has his team peaking at the right time of the year. Now, I think the bracket broke their way. Greg, I thought you were really astute with Purdue in the conference tournament. Maybe not necessarily tanking, but being okay with an early exit to recharge the batteries. And then, Michigan caught the right sort of just bracket sort of layout with Whiskey missing all their shots. So I thought it was a favorable matchup against A&M, given that they had the bigs to box those guys out who so often rely on the offensive rebounds. I still think this is just a touch too many points at 8. So I like the Wolverines a little bit, but I do worry that I'm not exactly buying the dip on this Wolverine stock. I think I'm buying high, whereas maybe I should be selling high and then buying low on Auburn. But I do think there's substance to this decline of the Tigers over the last month. I think there's something to this.
Doug, it sounds crazy to say it out loud, but I completely agree with you as far as our thoughts on Michigan go right now. And I think the general consensus here has been trying to sell Michigan throughout this 5-game win streak. And if you've been doing that, you haven't made much money doing that. So, look, it's probably going to come crashing down at some point. Johni Broome is sensational, and Auburn's athleticism can cause problems for the Wolverines, certainly. There's so much to like narratively in this game, just from an entertainment standpoint. This is Danny Wolf against the Auburn team that he sent packing from the NCAA tournament in the first round last year. This is Michigan point guard Trey Donaldson, who has hit a go-ahead shot in the final 2 minutes of their last 4 games against his old program that Bruce Pearl hand chose Dusty May as the guy to take Trey Donaldson from him in the summer. So there's a lot of interesting storylines here. For me, the bottom line is this Auburn team is not the same since Johni Broome re-aggravated his injury. This is a 6-game sample size at this point. And it was in the Kentucky game where he tweaked his shoulder injury that he had come back from. Since then, he is just not the same guy. He's only 2 for 16 from 3-point range. He's got a bunch of single-digit scoring performances in that range. And Auburn as a team has really suffered. They've dropped almost 20 spots in national efficiency rating just in that span. It matches what we're seeing. This is not the dominant Auburn team that we saw for 3.5 months. They were on the ropes with Creighton and pulled away in the final 8 minutes or so. But I think this Michigan turnaround is for real. The role players are just giving you things they were giving you back at the beginning of the season that for whatever reason in the back half of Big Ten play disappeared. Roddy Gale had the best game of his career last game. Namari Burnett has been making shots prior to that game. Reuben Jones suddenly giving them things they haven't had. But most importantly for me, schematically, I do think there's a lot to like that Michigan can replicate that has been a constant in all of Auburn's 5 losses this year. You look at their 5 teams they've lost to: Duke, Florida, Texas A&M, Alabama, Tennessee. Obviously, those are 5 great teams, so they're going to be good at a lot of things. But the one thing those 5 teams could all do was hold up one-on-one in the post against Johni Broome. They didn't have to send double teams. They're all teams that grade out very well in 2-point percentage defense, and were able to stay home on the Auburn supporting cast, the shooters that go nuclear in Auburn's most impressive performances. I think Michigan will be able to replicate that. They are 12th in the country in 2-point percentage defense. Vlad Golden and Danny Wolf, you can't replicate that size until you see it on the court. And I think that's going to ultimately play true here. I don't hate a money line sprinkle for Michigan. I personally am not bold enough to do it, but I am going to take the 8 points and feel very comfortable that Michigan keeps this a classic Michigan one possession finish. Troy, what insights can you add for us?
Yeah, I think it's important when you mentioned the teams that gave Auburn some issues in the SEC. One of those is Texas A&M, a team that Michigan just beat. And Michigan made some excellent second half adjustments, especially on the high pick and roll, in getting not one, but two, but three switches. So they got out of position and then got back in position and then got back in position again. And Texas A&M had to start going away from that because Buzz Williams realized he was not having success and didn't have a counter to that. That just shows Dusty May what he's capable of doing, making halftime adjustments and whatnot. We were trashing Michigan when we started this podcast at the beginning of the Big Ten tournament. To see them come this far, I feel somewhat responsible for it, but also the major trope, they're peaking at the right time. They are playing excellent basketball. This is a team that 8 points feels like a freebie here because, like you mentioned, Auburn has been struggling. You know, an interesting trend on Auburn is they entered the tournament having lost 3 of their last 4 games. No team that has ever won the national championship had entered the tournament having lost 3 of their last 4. Certainly, there's still more games to play before you get to a potential national championship game, but that certainly lends credence to the fact that Auburn is not playing all that well. What I can tell you about where bettors at Bet Rivers are with this game is certainly early money on the favorite, 61% of the money, which is actually not a lot on Auburn, 88% of the tickets, a little bit stronger as you'd expect. 70% of the money, 80% of the tickets are on Michigan to cover. I think that's smart. It aligns with what both of you said. It aligns with what I'm about to say, which is I like Michigan +8 here as well. I think this game could be very close. If you were really on Auburn, maybe take them first half to cover. Michigan has lost the first half in 7 straight NCAA tournament games against a higher seed. And Auburn, while maybe not playing as well as Michigan right now, is obviously the higher seed. So I think this could be potentially the most shocking game of the day where we think Michigan wholeheartedly should cover this spread and Auburn just says, by the way, we're Auburn and we win by 15. I also think Michigan could win outright by 6 or 7 points, much to Greg's sprinkle on the money line here, which I'm not totally against. Or I think this could be a finish of the tournament down to the wire. Trey Donaldson does something again. I think this is probably the most palpable buzz game of the Sweet 16 just because of the ways this game could play out. The feature stars in this game, the coaches on the sidelines, has everything, all the makings of a really, really, really good game.
One thing I would add that we should probably just note for any bettors out there on either side, this is a very unique environment game because it will be played in Atlanta. And the game before this is Michigan State and Ole Miss. So you will see the Spartan fan base travel. Now, you could argue that the Spartan fans, if they win their game, will stick around and actually pull for their rival here. I mean, if I was a Michigan State fan, I think I'd rather see the Michigan team that we swept, that we really dominated twice this year, more than I would want to see the 1-seeded Auburn Tigers. Then again, it's a rival. So it could be a strange environment in general. If you want to predict how Michigan State fans will react to that one, you let me know what you think. But I think you're right, Troy. All eyes will be on this one, and there should be some heroics one way or another. Let's go to our 4th and final game of the Sweet 16. We've got Purdue taking on the Houston Cougars. Houston -8, -400 on the money line, big favorite. Purdue 3-1 on the money line is an underdog. Our total is 133. Doug, what do you got?
I really like Houston here. I think we've been waiting for the right opponent to fade the Boilermakers, and I would prefer this was on the back end of a weekend, so the quick turnaround. But I just think that ISO ball with Braden Smith is just going to not have the same success as he's had so far. He's been outstanding, and he creates separation. And the analyst, I forget who it was talking about it in the broadcast. how he does the fadeaway to almost give himself some more height advantage or less disadvantage with his defender. I just think Houston is the wrong team to try to do ISO ball with and back it down. I think they go too late into the shot clocks. So actually, I don't love Houston's offense, but it's actually not that bad. They'll pull away, but I'm going to probably do the game total or the team total. And you're looking at like, what is it, 60 or 59? If there's nothing posted yet at Bet Rivers, but if you do the math, it should be 67-59. That's 126-ish. So maybe it's a little higher than that. My math on the fly is butchering. But I might do what I did last week with Tennessee and just do Houston in the under, like I did with Tennessee in the under for the UCLA game, stuff like that. Houston, the under is only plus 123, but you don't have to lay the 8. And I just don't see Purdue's offense generating much when they really are a two-man show. And that's just something that plays into the strength of Houston. I just don't think the Cougars are going to get beat in that fashion.
Yeah, we threw around the term nightmare matchup a bit last week for especially some of those Michigan games, which ultimately they overcame that. And I think that's what Purdue is up against here, because they don't want to see a team as physical as Houston. They don't want to see a team that has the type of perimeter defense that can pressure, get into Braden Smith. He's not going to have one possession off in this game. And we have seen him repeatedly, really, throughout the second half of Big Ten play, kind of come up short on a lot of his shot attempts in the final 4 to 6 minutes of a game because so much is on his plate. Houston is just not an opponent to overcome those sort of struggles with. I think they're going to need a great Trey Kaufman-Wren game. And I do think they could get one of those because TKR is a guy that can get your bigs in foul trouble and is just a tough guard. He is such a phenomenal finisher. He can finish with his hook shots from all the way out to the free throw line. They're going to need him at his best. They're going to need the role players at their best. I want to pull the trigger on Houston here, and I think that is the smart side of the bet. The only thing that scares me a little bit is honestly some this tournament voodoo, where it seems like every year Houston is on the one line. Kelvin Sampson has a team that is Final Four good or even national championship good, and something just goes wrong. Sometimes something out of their control. You think back to that Jamal Shed injury last year. 8 points is a lot against a team led by the duo that took them to the national championship game last year. And Matt Painter's a coach I have so much respect for. I would be surprised if they just got ran out of the gym, even though it is a nightmare matchup. But then you think back to how Houston just handled Gonzaga. I mean, they were up 14 points midway through that second half. That game ended up not nearly what it should have been on the scoreboard. It ended up being much closer thanks to some late game flukiness. So for me, out of respect for Matt Painter and Braden Smith, quite frankly, it's a stay away. But I think schematically, all signs point to Houston being the smart side here. And for whatever reason, I got a pit in my stomach thinking that Purdue won't make it close. Troy, can you get me over the edge here? What trends do you have for us on this one?
Well, my first non-trend, but kind of observation is that, we look at historical trends and what teams did last year. And, a team got bounced in the first round. There hasn't been a lot of consistency from programs who can do this every single year. Gonzaga, obviously, is a marquee name that has made, like 8 straight in the second weekends. Houston is the most sturdy identity we have in this tournament. Kelvin Sampson has made more second weekends than any other coach, I think, in the last 5 to 10 years. We know exactly what they're going to do. They do not deviate unless there is an injury. I kind of disagree that wonky things happen. It might be wonky for Houston terms, but that is only a slight register on the Richter scale. This team is so sturdy and dependable that I have a really hard time thinking that anyone can beat them unless you're an elite team, and I don't see Purdue as that. I certainly think Houston's going to win the game. Now the discussion becomes, will they cover? That is really tricky here. Houston has covered the spread in 3 of their last 4, but just 4 times in their last 10 games. But now one interesting aspect is where this game is being played. If I recall, this game will be played in Indianapolis. Stone's throw from West Lafayette. Is it East Lafayette? It's Lafayette. And obviously where the Big Ten tournament was. But Houston has won the first half in 13 straight games against non-conference opponents. I think that, they're going to come out and throw the clamps on Purdue right away. Purdue will have the energy edge, obviously, but what Houston does really well is prevent teams from getting to 10 quickly off the bat. Purdue has scored 66 or 68 points in 7 straight games. That streak started after scoring 58 points against Michigan State, and before that, they got just absolutely clamped up by Indiana in the second half of that really surprising Sunday matchup in Bloomington. So when they play teams that have lockdown defense, if Braden Smith isn't on pace to score 35 or 40, it can be a long day at the office. And I do think that is going to be the case here. What I don't like is that over-under's at 133. That's low. If this were 143, I'd be hammering the under. But I don't know if I can safely make an underplay here because the number is so low. So really surprising there. What's not surprising is that, 86% of the money at Bet Rivers and 91% of the tickets are on Houston. And right now, 73% of the money and 69% of the tickets to cover are on Houston as well. But I do think that will go down as I could see this number probably getting to 7.5. I would not be surprised. But I just don't know if Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer can handle the pressure that Houston's going to provide. This is, I hate to say it because you've already said it, but this is a nightmare scenario for the Purdue guards, not necessarily the bigs. But I think, Braden Smith trying to get time and space on his shot is going to be tough, even with the energy, Indianapolis. So, I don't know if Houston's going to cover 8, but I'm fairly confident that, they are going to hold Purdue under 63 points, and the Purdue team total is 62.5. But I'm not sure about over or under 133.5. But I think Houston advances because this is what we kind of know about them. Will they win the national championship? I'm not sure. Will they make the national championship? I'm not sure. But I think they are better than Purdue, and I think it will play out, even though they're playing essentially a road game.
This is why I love Troy Machir, because you've given me a play I didn't see coming with some of these trends, and specifically your point on where this game is played. It's actually being played at the Colts facility at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. It is 60 miles from Purdue's campus, West Lafayette. It is a home game, but it's a football stadium game. We've seen a lot of football stadiums affect players shooting, especially two teams that rely on three-point shooting the way that Purdue and that Houston do. So I'm actually officially locking in, added to my card. I'm taking the under 133 here. The more I think about this, I completely agree. Houston defensively is going to cause problems for Braden Smith. And in general, in a football stadium game, I think there's going to be a lot of threes taken. The one thing I was going to mention, but I just didn't in the first spiel on this. The one thing that gives me pause with Houston covering too, they have a really horrible 2-point percentage as an offense. They're the number 1 3-point shooting team in the country, but they only make 48% of their twos. That's just not really their game. Now they dominate the boards and get a lot of putbacks, but this is not exactly a team's comfort zone. They're not just going to bully Purdue in the post the way that some teams have been able to take advantage of Purdue's inside issues. So you add that to the football stadium's effects on shooting and all the points that you made on the under potentially. I'm locking in the under at 133. I think this will be an ugly basketball game. There you have it, folks. There's our preview for the 4 Sweet 16 games in this Big Ten Conference. Doug, I want to throw it back to you as we always do. What's your best bet for the Sweet 16?
Yeah, I mean, I'm close to that Houston and under 133, but I think I'm going to isolate the Purdue team total of 62.5. I just think it's a tough ask. And you mentioned it. They're going to make Braden Smith work on both sides of the court. The backdrop of Lucas Oil is certainly a variable to the potential shooting woes. And the Boilermakers, they've played a tougher schedule based on Ken Palm rankings and things like that. So there is a scenario, and I always try to remind people, especially newer bettors, just no matter how much you love a game, there's someone very sharp who loves the other side just as much. So I'm thinking, look, if Purdue's going to get points, like this Houston team, familiarity with opponent, yes, they shut down BYU a couple times and they've done some stuff, but that's in conference. If you hit shots, and there really sometimes there's no defense to hitting shots, maybe the Boilermakers get hot. Maybe Painter schemes some stuff. Greg, you mentioned the 2-point defense for the Cougs, things along those lines. There is a path, obviously, to over 62.5. It's not a huge number, but I'm going to go to the window with Houston's defense, the intensity of defense, both sides, measured possessions with a team that doesn't have a bunch of depth. with the Boilermakers. I mean, we saw the shot clock winding down in a lot of possessions in their last couple games. I just think they're gonna try to win this game in the 50s and not just try to waste possessions on offense against a stout defense. So I like the team total under. I really think the Boilermakers are gonna have a tough time getting points.
To that point, too, on any sort of under in this game, Purdue's last 2 totals have gone 138 in this tournament against High Point and McNeese. So only 5 points short, and you get to this number that we're looking after for Houston. And both teams love to play slow. So the more we talk this through, I think we're all kind of coming to the same conclusion. I like the team total underplay as well. My best bet for the Sweet 16, I'm just going to go back to my guts feel on this. I think the number's way too short for Michigan State, -3.5. Matchup wise, it's extremely favorable. They're going to live at the free throw line. And I just expect Jace Richardson to get right, point blank. There's nobody on the Ole Miss side of things that I think can really frustrate him. He's been so bad in this tournament, and they've still been covering the number. At some point, the breakout superstar performance that NBA scouts want to see will come to fruition. I think it happens here in Atlanta in the Sweet 16. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of The 10. It's been really fun to work on this show with these guys down the stretch of this season. Make sure that you go to Bet Rivers and check out the house specials page where you can get daily boosted bets and special props for every game in the NCAA tournament. For Troy Machir, for Doug Kezirian, I am Greg Waddell, and we'll see you on the next episode of The 10.
Thanks for watching College Sports Rushes the 10 on the Bet Rivers Network.